in medical school in the late 1990s, my embryology teacher that taught us said there were three races: Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and Negroid, right? So decolonizing my own thinking around health. Like, we weren't taught anything about racism in medical school, especially back in the 90s, or even now, medical schools are not teaching about that. So I have to constantly learn from the social sciences. So anthropology, sociology, they've been talking about race as a social construct for a long time. Medicine is really, we're the last, I tell them we're the last bastions of white supremacy. Like, we're holding on like this.
A way to describe it.
We're like, but no, your kidneys are different. Your lungs are different. Like, all these things are in textbook. We teach this, we test this way. And it makes no logical sense that my vagina would have more bacteria because of my melanin.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Spiritually Fly. I'm your host and your guide, Faith Hunter. By listening or watching this podcast, you are taking steps to rebuild your life, learn ways to courageously live out your dreams, or maybe you're here to unlock your potential. You know why you are here. So let's drop into the power of self-healing and step into a place of self-care. Along the way, I'll provide you with science-based yet spiritually grounded practices that will enhance your life and elevate your soul. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of Spiritually Fly. I am Faith Hunter, your host and your guide, and this is episode number 10. Pew, 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 pew. That's right, it is episode number 10, and I'm switching things up a little bit. We're going to do an interview. Today's episode is a conversation, an amazing, powerful interview with my homegirl, a dear friend, Dr. Joia Crear-Perry. Joia is the president as well as founder of the National Birth Equity Collaborative, located in Washington, D.C. Now, this interview I recorded in the middle of the pandemic. So although it was recorded in 2020, the information, the content, the aha moments that I'm sure you will experience are evergreen. Because we're going to talk about what it means to be a Black woman in America, what it means to be a Black mother in this country, and how being a Black mother and woman impacts maternal and child health. So go on, grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and enjoy this amazing, powerful, and dynamic interview with my friend, Joia.
What's up, Joia?
Oh, it's so amazing to be here with you, Faith. It's just been so long, and I'm just honored to be a part. It's just known you since the 70s, I guess. 80s?
70s. You
70s.
You're right. Since the 70s, and when we were in dance class together.
Yes.
And hanging out in Grambling.
Exactly, the big city. You know, for me, that's the Gramblingness is such an important part of who I am and who we are. My daughter always says she can tell folks from Grambling, she can feel it. We have a certain energy. And I do think that energy is from growing up in a place where you were valued, and everybody in the community valued us. And so we didn't have to worry about some of the things. So some of the work that I do is when I went out into the rest of the world and left our little bubble and realized that everybody didn't value us the same way. They didn't think where everybody is somebody wasn't their motto.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because we grew up with that being just ingrained in us and poured in us from the time we were little kids.
Exactly. And it's really the level of people, just if you were good, it didn't matter. We didn't have a long lot of lineage of people, generations of wealth, the kind of things that are barriers in some other communities. We just had people who were working hard together and believed in common, supporting each other. And so it's just weird for me when I leave that bubble and then have to go out in the rest of the world. So some of the trainings and the work that I do is me understanding how the rest of the world was socialized to believe that we're supposedly broken and can't make decisions. Like, have you met my friends? I don't know.
Wow. Wow. Dang. So one of the questions I always ask my guest is, how do your ancestors speak through you?
Oh man, so many ways. I would say the work that I get to do is a direct reflection of my ancestors' voices to me. Their presence. I mostly hear them in the mornings when I'm quiet and I'm still. I can hear the pushes and the congratulations and the joys and the all of those voices. So I do think that the work, especially around anti-racism and anti-gender oppression, I can feel my grandmother. I can hear Polly Elizabeth Gafford talking about how I was going to be all these things and how I was, special and amazing, and how we were all so important for the future. And so I try to put that into my children as well. This understanding of kind of the greatness that's within us, and how we share that with others, and how we believe that everybody has some greatness. There's no,
So I'm glad you brought up your children. So as a mother, especially when they were young, what were some of the key messages that you were pouring into them, were informing them and giving them the safety and security that they needed, but also the lessons, so that when they do leave your home, that's the bubble, and move out into the world.
Right. I have, I have two groups of children. So you've met my oldest. So my daughter's 27, Jade, and she teaches yoga like you. So she was like, Faith. I was like, yes. So super. And she loves when she comes to DC to get to take your classes. So thank you for being an inspiration to her. And so Jade, her experience as having me as a parent at 21 years old, and just trying to figure out, I tease her, I'm like, you survived me, yay. But really at that moment, I was trying to protect a whole lot, like really making really focused decisions around when you're young and you don't have a lot of resource. I didn't have a lot of money. I was in medical school. My ex-husband was a policeman, her dad. And so our life was really small. And can you imagine me married to the police? That was
I didn't even know that.
It was not a good strategy on my part. He's an amazing person, awesome. I'm not really built for like constraint and policing.
Yes. I get it.
Yeah. So so it was really, I was always looking for spaces for her to find joy. We actually had a conversation because the talk that's happening now, because I'm a gynecologist, I asked her, I said, did I ever have the talk with you around like female stuff? And she was like, no, because I don't remember just sitting down. I remember that it was always in every part of our lives. It wasn't one conversation. I was instilling in her always the joy of her body, and believing that she should enjoy sex, and it should be not something that when you start having sex, it should be something that you enjoy, and that you are created just as you are, perfect and amazing. And just really I tried to recreate her bubble, just like we grew up in Grambling. I looked for places in New Orleans when I was raising her where she could go to school and be protected, be in an environment that valued her. So I put her in all girls schools so she could practice and be around other people who were artsy and like to dance and do things. But just trying to find ways to put my children in places that valued them.
Yeah.
And the same thing, I have a son, my oldest son was born premature. He only weighed about 1 pound when he was born. Yeah, I was in medical school, so it's a stressful time.
Yes.
And so really for him, it was finding places that valued him, that he could be, growing up, but he doesn't still see himself as different. He's 24 years old and he has girlfriends and he thinks he's super cool. And so much of really just trying to make room for, I was like, when you say special needs, he's looking around the room like, who are you talking about? It's really like our whole family just really, he's just another part of the family. But it's different now, having Roby, Andre and I did fertility. I got remarried at 35. We went through fertility. We ended up using a gestational carrier. We started off with 13 embryos. We only had 2 left. So I was like, try my old uterus one more time or a younger uterus. One that has not been as stressed. And so ignorance is bliss. When I had children at 21, I was just happy they could make it through. At 39, it was like, oh, I got to read every book. I got to look at everything, looking at all the details around making sure that he was in the best programs, we had the right foods, all these things, very different. And truthfully, this pandemic has allowed me to be still and spend more time just with him. It reminds me of when I was with my older children, and we didn't have a lot of other distractions. It was just kind of school and family and us. And and then of course, and so it's just important for me to really have this time. It's great to have this time to really just be in the house with him and getting closer to being able to instill more values in a small contained space. Life gets really busy as you get older, and you can lose sight of kind of the connectedness with your children and your family.
Right. Yeah. And so how are you communicating to Roby as a young Black boy, and he will be a man? I'm like, the years will fly by so quickly. And how do you communicate to him how to really be true to who he is and navigate the world that we're living in?
I am learning more around figuring out what masculinity looks like even, right? So how do I communicate to a Black boy who's 9 years old in this current time, identities around masculinity, identities around gender, like all of those things, where will he fit? Where will he sit? Like our little Black bubble growing up in Grambling, Louisiana is not gonna be his reality. So how will he find his sense of self? And really working on the things that identified him as an individual, but still rooted in community, and finding people who he loves and values. And that's really, it's very different. So each one of my children have presented different things that I had to learn about my own self in order to parent them.
Oh my goodness. So what have you learned from him the most?
Whew. So many things. I would say I knew I was stubborn. And I used to blame my older children's stubbornness on my ex-husband, but I'm the common denominator between all three children. And so his desire to be free at all times, like his constant refrain is why. He wants to know, he wants control over his own body, his own ideas. And so I think that's deeply rooted in who we are as a family and who I am. And it shows up in him. And so then when I'm navigating parenting him, I realize his reflex is always, I want to do it. I know how to do it. Don't try to boss me. Like that's in his head. And life is going to boss him. That's how that works. So figuring out the navigation between how free you can be within certain, life is trying to make you be inside of a box and put you inside of a box.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I want to shift to, because I know that you and I truly believe the same thing, that racism impacts our overall health and well-being. And that's definitely part of one reason why I constantly try to create as many wellness tools so that our community can feel and know they're being heard and being supported. Yep. How is your organization stepping out? And I know you go out and do a lot of speeches, but based upon your organization, how are you guys really highlighting that message so people really understand the impact of racism on our health?
Yeah, it's so important. Honestly, it started with my own self, my own decolonizing of my understanding of how health works. As you know, I went to medical school at LSU, and in medical school in the late 1990s, my embryology teacher that taught us said there were three races: Mongoloid, Caucasoid, and Negroid, right? So decolonizing my own thinking around health. Like we weren't taught anything about racism in medical school, especially back in the 90s, or even now, medical schools are not teaching about that. So I have to constantly learn from the social sciences. So anthropology, sociology, they've been talking about race as a social construct for a long time. Medicine we're the last bastions of white supremacy. Like we're holding on like this.
Way to describe it.
We're like, well, no, your kidneys are different. Your lungs are different. Like all these things are in text, but we teach this, we test this way. And it makes no logical sense. That my vagina would have more bacteria because of my melanin. Like that's the kind of things we teach and study. I had to really stop thinking that my own self and like really think about all the places that shows up. And then we do trainings with hospitals, with healthcare providers. Right now, we even just did one recently with 100 Black women, like with groups around, because the information was not given to us. So just like I had to learn this, not in medical school, but reading other books and other things, people who are currently in nursing school and medical school, they're not learning about racism, about the history of J. Marion Sims, who's the father of gynecology, who practiced on Black women who were enslaved without anesthesia to create our instruments for gynecology. Yeah. So those are the kind of like facts that we really have to hold on to.
I want to go back to just breaking down the constructs of institutionalized racism within the medical profession. I mean, as you know, my older brother was a gynecologist as well. And I mean, both of you guys went to Xavier.
Yes, exactly. I remember him very, very well. He's very and I know you have an organization in his honor.
Our nonprofit, our family foundation is really guided by some of the principles that he kind of laid the foundation, because when he went to medical school out in LA, and then he started practicing medicine in Watts, and his main focus was to ensure that women of color, you know, African American, but also Latinas, receive quality healthcare. But also, I mean, he learned Spanish so that he could actually provide proper care to women of color in California. But looking at what you're doing, how do you encourage healthcare providers to break down those walls so that women still feel safe? I mean, is that part of some of the education that you are doing?
For sure. In fact, so in a lot of ways, what Mark did and what we do is normal because it's how we grew up. So our frame, we use these words like a racial equity lens or having a frame of justice, and we write all these things out. And so those are the kind of things I teach, but they're really things that were innate to us, right? So it's trying to take what we learned as like natural as breathing and write them into metrics, into strategies, so that others can then take what we do naturally and learn how to do those things, right? So a concrete thing would be, right now, a lot of people, when they're talking to patients who want birth control, if they're Black or brown, they assume they have to ask them about birth control. And if the patient says, well, I'm not sure yet, they're trying to convince them that they should want it. Because in their minds, they're doing them a service by making sure, oh, you don't have a job or you're uninsured, so you should really need this birth control. My job is to convince you because I know that you should have it. Versus for us, if a person says they don't want to talk about it, they're not interested in birth control, instead of worrying about birth control for them, helping them get access to a job or higher educational attainment, the things, not trying to control their ability to get wealth through their uterus, but really helping them to get access to other things to help for their wellness. Really, I really believe my daughter living in LA and doing yoga, and she's gonna outlive all of the rest of our family, right? Like this, we haven't made room for having space to just be and to be well, and so making room for our patients. We have to have wellness. So yoga, offering wellness. We have a whole wellness training that we do with providers, trying to get providers, and of course I don't do it, but we still got with others to do it. Right? And for birthing people, for pregnancy, really just expanding how we talk about wellness, that it's not this transactional interaction between a OBGYN and a patient or a midwife and a patient, but all the things about their life make for wellness. And so our interaction with them as providers should really be about their entire physical and mental well-being. And what are we doing to support whatever their vision for their life is, and not just kind of control their life through reproduction, which is how American healthcare was built.
Yeah. And how does generational trauma impact our health? Yeah. I mean, just me saying that word, your head's like, Yeah, so just go for it.
Yeah, I mean, but that's truthfully why I'm like, you know what, Jade, live in LA, teach yoga. We have a lot of generational trauma in our family. Somebody can be free. It's time. It's time. We've worked really hard to try to prove our value to the world as Black people. And you and I are from places that we did all these really, we have a lot of friends who are doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs. And we do all these things, and yet people still don't see us as valuable.
Yes.
And so it's an opportunity for us to say, maybe that was never the point. Maybe it wasn't that we weren't if we had just gotten educated, then the world would value us as people of color, or if we would just wear our hair a certain way or behave a certain way. None of those things are actually ever real measures, because we do those things and we're still devalued. And so making room for patients just to get to be, maybe the whole goal was control in the first place. Yes. And so how do we stop people wanting to control us?
Wow. So the fight that we're in right now is a marathon.
Yes, it is. Definitely a marathon.
It's not a sprint. We're not just going to run, do our protests. It's
going to be a long, hot summer. It's going to be a long, hot summer.
And so because it is, we all know that it's going to be a marathon. What are some of the tools that you are personally using to ensure that you're sustaining this marathon?
I made a decision about 6 months ago, or maybe longer, I don't remember, that what I realized is I wanted to be able to move when I got older. When I say move, I mean move my body. I think about some of our elders. We come from a place where people live to be 90, 100 years old. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that I have some of that, right? That I'm gonna do the things to live a long time, but I wanna be mobile while I do it. So trying to work on breathing, trying to work on spending more time with your organization, with Stuart, who I love. And part of my barrier, and this is, being honest, my barrier was I don't like going into studios with other people. Like, it reminds me of our old ballet classes, of this very competitive, people are all here, we're all watching what other people do. And I can't get that out of my head to get the full benefit of what you're supposed to get from a yoga experience. Because I am still having my own trauma from what a classroom experience of dancing looks like for years and years and years. So for me, having personal lessons are great. It's my way of relaxing. I'm trying to get Roby to do, my baby son, Robeson, to do meditation with me, because it keeps me calm. And then really visioning for what the future could be. I think we're so close. And so I get satisfaction from dreaming. To get inspiration from thinking about what the ancestors have put inside of me and what we're dreaming to build for the future.
And what is one of your biggest dreams?
That just, how flat earthers are seen as odd, even though people still believe the earth is flat. But if someone says it out loud, you're like, okay, that's crazy. My dream is that's what racism will be. When people are like, Black people, they don't ever listen, and all they do is eat fried chicken. That people around them, everybody around them, be like, "Now you sound crazy," right? So that the idea that something innately about being Black makes you broken will become as crazy as an idea as that the Earth is flat.
You know what? I think that is a great dream.
Yes, I think it can happen too. Honestly.
I think it can, and I want to say that we're close to that. Mm-hmm. That's what I feel in my heart. And I think there've been so many eruptions that have happened in so many situations that have happened in the past 20 years, within our adulthood, that this is kind of like I'm dreaming now, the major peak.
I'm here with you. I'm ready.
That this is the peak and people are truly listening. Yeah. And I think that we are finding allies.
Yes.
What are you telling your allies in these days of how they can support Black Americans and other people of color?
Mine evolved, honestly, over the weekend. A friend of mine, acquaintance, Sonia Renee, she wrote, a white person said to her, "I now understand and can feel your pain." And she wrote back, "I don't need you to feel my pain. I need you to feel your own." So my new evolution is that we don't get here just because Black people are perceived to be broken. We get here because white folks haven't dealt with their own pain. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the pain and the trauma of what they might be losing or perceived loss, or maybe the perceived position in the world, whatever it is, whatever that trauma is. And it shows up when you see the lady in the park, right? With the guy who was bird watching. You can feel her pain. Yes, she's angry. She's angry because she perceives she's supposed to have a thing, right? So what is that pain that's triggering So I am telling my white allies to really work on themselves. Like, it's time to really reflect on you and your family members and what is the need to feel, what does whiteness mean? The really concrete one. Like, I want my grandchildren, no matter who my children marry, to think of themselves as Black, to identify with Blackness. So no matter what shade of their skin color, because for me, Blackness is a culture. It is not just for me. It's a culture, it's a social political construct. So I want them to hold on to our value sets. So if you are a white person today, if you want your grandchildren to be white, what does that mean? Because it's not biological. So what are the cultural and values of whiteness that you're passing on? And if that makes you nervous, because honestly it should, right? Because historically whiteness meant terror and harm and colonization and all these other things. So then what do you need to work through to make it mean something else? Or do it? That's it. What is it? What is, I don't know.
What is it not? Yeah. That, I think that's a really sweet point. I was giving a talk on my IGTV last week, and I was like, we have always been in this state where we are healing from something, or even if our healing just meant I'm going to church and I'm going to pray about it. That was a form of healing within the Black community. But I feel like what I've informed some white people that listen to my platform, I was like, we're going to work on our shit, but you got to work on your shit too.
Yes, exactly.
Like you can't just like assume that, by uplifting us that you're going to be satisfied and you're going to be taken care of and okay. That's not how it works.
And it doesn't work on so many levels, because when you go home, I can feel the fear when I do these trainings, and we're talking about identity. We're talking about racial identity. We do this circle of identity. When your circle of identity is around whiteness, and I'm telling you that I give you the actual real history of whiteness and what it means and what it is currently and what it's doing, then you really have a moment of have to scrap what is the well-being, what does your spirit say about how you align with this identity? And what is it that you're wanting? I can see so many manifestations of people grappling with that, but they haven't really fully embraced what that would mean as people. Because there's not Blackness and then default. If there is a Black culture, there is a white culture, and they have to interrogate where they sit inside of it and what that means to them.
When you're giving your speeches and you're doing trainings, what has been pushback that you've received from the white community?
I'm mostly doing it with healthcare providers, and so that's why I understand how deadly this idea that race is biological is from healthcare providers, because that's really the pushback that I get. I can spend an entire day and they'll say, well, there's this medicine that they say works better in Black people. So that must mean that Black race is biological, because how could a medicine work better in Black people? But if you look back at the data, the medicine will be done in African ancestry. You could be white appearing and have African ancestry. I mean, I have Irish ancestry. My daughter did the DNA thing. And so if there's some Irish illness, I should get it too, but I'm Black appearing. So the way we equate race with our ancestry, our genetics, is also based on a racialized identity. So the pushback I get from providers is they really are holding on to still the biological basis. And it's because we did it for so long. Like, it's so embedded in so many parts of healthcare. Like, there's a calculator to see if you can have a C-section after you've had a C-section before, if you can have a vaginal delivery. And they put in race as an indicator for this calculator. And so I was in an interview with a PBS with the guy who made up the calculator. So when we were trying to explain to him how that was racist, he was like, but that's what the data shows. But the data is based upon people's biases. So if Black people are more likely to get C-sections, you create a calculator that now says, this is how this works. You have given a tool to providers that validates their racism. You have now operationalized their bias to something that's peer reviewed. He really couldn't see that was a problem. I was like, so either you have to believe that there's something biologically about our pelvises that make Black people have different C-sections, or you have to see that because race is a social and political construct, to say that Black people have more C-sections means there's something socially or politically causing that. Not anything about their bodies or their choices or any of that. So then you creating a calculator that tells people to do that, you are incentivizing, or even if not incentivizing, you're allowing for that bias to continue. So those are the kind of pushbacks I get.
Wow. And so looking at race again and the impact that it has on mortality rate, can you just enlighten us around some things that you share with healthcare providers or when you're out?
Yeah, I mean, the reason that I think this work is important when it comes to maternal mortality is because in general, we are usually 2 times more likely. So Black people are Black babies are twice as likely to die within a year of childbirth. We're usually twice as likely to have diabetes or hypertension. And so I think we have normalized as a US, as a country, that Black people are just twice as likely to die from things. And it feels normal. People say it like it's nothing. So when the data came out that we were 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, it at least caught people's attention. Like, oh, well, why would their biology be different in childbirth versus diabetes? But when you add racism and gender oppression, right? Racism and misogyny, racism and patriarchy, you exponentiate all of the things. Right? And so, it becomes a double whammy. So trying to explain to people how gender identity impacts health, right? So you talked about, Mark, and the history of HIV and like how all of that was genderized oppression on our bodies and sexualities and harming people, not because people were broken and making bad choices, but because we had structures and systems that were trying to break them. So that's the same kind of language I try to use with folks. I think sometimes for providers, when they can see themselves, so if you can see the same way we ignore, say, older people. So if you have a parent who's ill, when they go into the hospital, you have to be there with them because their pain might get ignored, their desires, so you're there to just make sure they're okay. That's the same thing that happens for people of color. Like, we go in expecting to be treated poorly, and so we need a support system. If you tell us we can't have a support system, then we really fear you more because we think you're trying to hide or do something to us, and we don't trust you to be there alone. And so those are the kind of pointers we make. Wow. But it's different. They're accustomed to doing things by themselves, so they get very aggravated when we bring in 10 people to a delivery.
I was just about to ask that because I'm curious how that is being navigated with, over the past couple of months with the COVID epidemic, where you can't have that support system. I mean, hospitals are really only limiting it to the person that is ill at the time. Yeah. I mean, have you had any experience or heard stories around how people are navigating that?
It's not good. It's definitely not good. It's been really bad, honestly. So there have been stories like Amber Rose Isaac in the Bronx, who she unfortunately died after having her baby alone. She made several attempts to get in for care. She was a beautiful young woman who, because they were having in-person visits, she was trying to navigate telemedicine, and there's a disconnect between hospitals and telemedicine. So there are so many breakdowns. I have never reviewed her chart. I don't know, the details of her case. But I know enough to know that if you are not having regular in-person care anymore, that we're doing because of COVID-19, that we want people to stay home and social distance. But if you're already a group of people who've been marginalized when it comes to your health, that is a disaster waiting to happen. We have no real strategy for how we transfer from in-person health that was already biased and we were already falling through the cracks to now telephonic. You decide who should come in, when they should come in. There's not really any protocols. That is really scary for me as a person who fights for health equity, because we were barely able to hold on to this social connectedness and convincing providers and hospitals that it was okay for people to have folks in the room. When I had Jade 27 years ago, I was in the room with just my husband. I can only have one person in the room. So we have policed how many people could be in the room for Black and brown folks for a really long time. So now you add on this COVID moment and now they have nobody. It's really scary.
That's my first time hearing about her story. And
it's sad. It's really sad. She was tweeting, so it's really big because she was tweeting like, I don't think I feel like her last tweet said something like, if something happens to me, it's because they're not listening to me. Like, it was very prescient. Her husband or her partner has really been fighting for just to try to get answers. And he's been doing a few interviews and stuff. Yeah, I mean, we don't have a safety net. Other countries would have as much. Every other country that is high income believes in a right to health. They do. They have decided as a national belief that everybody has a right to health. Because at the end of the day, if we don't believe that everybody should have health, then we won't invest in health for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So we're going to wrap it up. But what would you say is the key message that you would share with Black women as they're going through these days and moments?
The key message is that we always have dealt with and thrived and survived in all kinds of moments. And so for us, it's probably honestly feels a little familiar. We're accustomed to a little chaos. We're accustomed to the hustle and bustle of having to survive things. But at some point, we have to make room for being still and finding room for wellness. And so maybe this is a time for us to really find room for being still. So free, or working with Spiritually Fly. I love this idea of finding wellness through faith and through the work that you do with wellness. I think that for Black women to really model that, like to find ways to make room for their own stillness and their own wellness, is really our future. How we get to Black futurism, right? Like we have to make room for our own wellness and our own health because we got to be in the future.
You have to be in the future. Yeah. I think that's a great way to say it, is that we have to make like that space for our own wellness, because if we don't, no one else will.
It will never.
It will never happen.
No, it won't.
Yeah.
We have lots of examples of people we both know that they never made space for wellness, right? A lot of our elders, a lot of our ancestors, a lot of the Black women who've come before us, they worked really hard and they raised us and they did things, but they never made room for their own wellness. So we got to break that cycle.
Oh, we have to break the cycle big time. And it's really fascinating that when I think about my mother, she's 70, 77, 76. She's
fabulous.
She's fabulous, but she still doesn't make time for her own health and wellness.
I know she does. And the truth is, I said that not even knowing for sure, but I assume that she didn't.
So it's, but the fortunate part, I mean, is that while she's been in her own personal quarantine in her house and her backyard, front yard, I'm like, Mom, you can still go outside. You have grass, right? And go outside and just sit and breathe and walk around. She goes, oh yeah, okay, I can do that. And so she started about 2 weeks in, just taking her little walks and moving about. And 3 or 4 weeks after she started that routine every day, she's like, I feel so much better.
Right.
And then even her brain was sharper.
Right.
Yeah, because she had a mild stroke sometime in April of last year. Oh. Yeah. And so my brother and I were constantly, trying to get her to take these times, and even my sister-in-law, I mean, she's a nurse and she has a husband and a kid. She's like, I don't have time. And I'm like, Mark, you have to remind your wife to take time for herself, because she's taking care of you,
right,
and your son.
I just realized I've been saying Mark, but it's Michael.
Michael, yeah. It's all good. It's all good. But yeah, so I think that's a beautiful message for us to.
Yes, your mother's a perfect example. I know that she has been busy. My mother's same way, never stopping. Like, if she had not started her health to deteriorate, I'm sure she'd be in the hospital right now trying to be somebody's pharmacist. Like, you don't need to be anybody's pharmacist. Retire, ma'am.
Sit down.
Sit
down and breathe.
Right.
Take time out for yourself.
Right. That's the lesson. Yeah. And that it's okay. It's not inconsistent with our ancestors. They want us to breathe. Yeah.
Perfect. Oh my God, Joia, this has been the best conversation. It's been sweet.
I'm looking forward to it, honestly.
Oh my God, yeah. And it's just been nice to just catch up, but also just to hear about all the amazing things that you are doing and creating shifts and ripples and tidal waves in the world, because I know for a fact the healthcare system, because of just my own family's connection to it, needs to create a shift. And just some knowledge that you've dropped around some of the things that the medical system is still following as standard procedure has to change so that people of color can feel safe, welcome, and secure in that environment. And I think everyday people knowing these things are still in place is that's a protest within itself.
It is. It really, really is. It really, really is. And you know, Spiritually Fly is a big ripple. So I'm just honored to be on here and to be with you, because your ripple of wellness and health and like spiritual connectedness, I just really appreciate, honestly. Thank you.
Wow. Back at you, sister.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you. But before we get off, I want you to share website information and where people can learn more about your programs and your organization and where they can connect to you.
Sure. So National Birth Equity Collaborative, it's birthequity.org. And our Instagram is Birth Equity. And my personal is at .Crear-Perry, so DOCCrearPerry. And so that's both Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, we're in the middle of this COVID fight, but we're also fighting for our lives for Black folks and defund the police and invest in Black communities. That's some real stuff. We want everybody to get into it because we're moving forward. We need to move forward with progress. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joia. Yay. And have a good one.
All right,
Thank
you too. Okay.
Bye.
All right. I am quite sure you enjoyed that conversation with Joia. I know for a fact there were probably some aha moments and some great takeaways. Definitely share this as well as all of my other episodes with your friends and family. And of course, I'll see you in the next episode. Take care. Ciao.